The late afternoon sun painted the streets of Chicago in a hazy orange. Michael adjusted his rearview mirror and glanced at the Uber app glowing softly on his phone. A new ride request appeared, just a few blocks away. With a practiced tap, he accepted it and pulled up to the curb in front of a coffee shop. The passenger, a tall white man in his early 30s wearing a crisp button-down shirt, stepped outside. He looked at the black sedan idling near the curb, then at Michael behind the wheel. His face tightened instantly. No. No, I don't think so, the man muttered, half to himself, half loud enough for Michael to hear. Michael lowered the window with calm composure. Good evening. Are you Richard? The man shifted uncomfortably, but his voice grew sharper, defensive. Yeah, but, look, I'm not riding with you. I'll just call another one. Michael had heard that tone before, not once, not twice, but countless times in his life. He didn't need an explanation. The pause, the quick judgment in the man's eyes said it all. Still, he kept his voice steady. The app matched us. I can get you where you need to go. Richard shook his head, forcing a laugh that wasn't funny. I'll wait for another driver, thanks. His hand hovered over his phone, ready to cancel. A silence stretched between them. People passed by on the sidewalk, unaware of the small storm brewing at the edge of the street. To them, it was just another ride request gone wrong. Michael swallowed the sting rising in his chest. He had learned long ago not to let anger show, not to give anyone the satisfaction of confirming their prejudice. He simply nodded. That's your choice, he said quietly. Richard turned away, pacing impatiently as if standing near Michael's car for even a few moments was unbearable. Michael sat in the driver's seat, fingers tightening briefly on the steering wheel before he exhaled slowly. To anyone else, it was just a cancelled ride. To him, it was a reminder that no matter how far he had come in life, no matter what he had built, some people would only ever see his skin. He drove away, his profile still calm, though inside, a familiar heaviness pressed against his chest. He told himself what he always did, focus on the road. Don't let them break you. But tonight, that mantra felt heavier than usual. Michael didn't drive far after the refusal. He pulled into a quiet side street, turned off the engine, and let the silence surround him. For a moment, he just sat there, watching the last streaks of daylight fade behind the tall buildings. He wasn't just another Uber driver trying to make ends meet. Few people in the world knew the truth. The man sitting in that car was the very architect of the app itself. Michael Turner, co-founder and CEO of the ride-sharing giant, often slipped behind the wheel in secret. It wasn't about money. He didn't need the extra income, his bank account proved that. For him, driving was a way to stay connected, to feel the pulse of the city, to understand the frustrations of drivers and the needs of passengers. Data on a screen could never capture the real texture of humanity like an hour on the road could. As the streetlights flickered on, Michael leaned back, remembering the road that had brought him here. He had grown up in Atlanta, the son of a single mother who worked double shifts at a diner to keep food on the table. Life had been a series of locked doors and whispered judgments, teachers who assumed he wouldn't amount to much, neighbors who crossed the street when he walked by, job interviews where rejection came the moment he stepped into the room. But Michael had always loved computers. While other kids played outside, he spent nights in the public library, teaching himself to code on outdated machines. He believed that technology could be a great equalizer, a space where skin color didn't matter, only skill. Years later, after relentless work, after scholarships and sleepless nights at MIT, Michael had built something bigger than himself. He had created an app that redefined urban transportation. Millions used it every day. People called it innovative, life-changing. Investors called it the future. But moments like the one he just lived reminded him of a harsher truth. No matter how many billions his company was worth, no matter how often his name appeared in Forbes, when he sat in the driver's seat, he was just another black man on the street, vulnerable to the same prejudice his mother had warned him about. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, not in anger, but in resolve. That was why he drove. To remind himself that progress wasn't finished, that his mission was bigger than convenience and profit. It was about dignity, about proving that even in a world so divided, there could be spaces where everyone was equal, at least for the length of a car ride. Michael started the engine again. Another ride request buzzed on his phone. He tapped accept, his jaw set, his mind already moving past the sting of the last encounter. But deep down, he knew this story wasn't over. Richard Bennett sat at the bar of a downtown restaurant later that evening, a half-empty glass of whiskey sweating in his hand. He scrolled aimlessly through his phone, ignoring the hum of conversation around him. The incident outside the coffee shop was already fading from his mind, just another decision in a long day. In his head, he had justified it easily. I didn't feel comfortable. That's all. People are allowed preferences. But beneath the casual dismissal lay something he didn't dare name. Richard had grown up in the leafy suburbs of Milwaukee, in a neighborhood where the lawns were manicured and the families looked almost identical. His parents had been polite, church-going people who believed in tradition. They never called themselves racist. They didn't have to. Their jokes at the dinner table, their warnings about certain neighborhoods, their relief at never having to send Richard to a diverse school, all of it had shaped him quietly, invisibly, until prejudice felt like common sense. At 32, Richard worked as a mid-level manager at a financial firm. He lived comfortably, drove a leased BMW, and spent his weekends at sports bars or golf courses with colleagues who looked and sounded just like him. His world was safe, predictable, and insulated. And yet, he carried a restlessness he couldn't explain. Success never felt like success, achievements never quite filled the hollow space inside him. He craved respect, but he never earned it. When the Uber driver had pulled up earlier, Richard hadn't hesitated. He had seen the black man behind the wheel, felt a flicker of unease, and acted on it without a second thought. It was automatic, the way someone might flinch from a sudden noise. He didn't consider what it meant. He didn't have to. But now, as he scrolled, his phone buzzed with a notification. He tapped it carelessly, and froze. There he was, on screen, a video clip already circulating online. Grainy but clear enough to recognize his own face, standing on the sidewalk, rejecting the ride. The caption read, "Man refuses Uber because driver is black. 2025 and nothing has changed." His chest tightened. The video was already climbing in views. The comments scrolled faster than he could read. Disgusting. This guy works at Bennett in Harlow Financial. Fire him. Still think racism isn't real? Richard's stomach lurched. He turned the phone face down on the bar, as if hiding it could undo what had been set in motion. The bartender asked if he wanted another drink, but Richard only shook his head, lost in the slow, creeping dread of consequences he had never faced before. For the first time in his life, Richard realized something terrifying: the world was watching him. And it would not look away. By morning, the video had spread far beyond the corner of Chicago where it had been filmed. It was on Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, shared, stitched, mocked, dissected. Headlines appeared on blogs and news outlets. Man refuses ride from black Uber driver, caught on camera. Everyday racism in 30 seconds. Richard's phone lit up nonstop with messages, some from friends, most from strangers. At first, he tried to ignore them, but curiosity gnawed at him. He opened one notification and immediately wished he hadn't. Coward. We see you. Hope your boss knows. He barely made it into the office before the whispers began. His coworkers, usually chatty in the break room, fell silent when he walked in. Two of them exchanged looks. His manager called him into a glass-walled conference room, the blinds only half closed, making the meeting itself a public spectacle. Richard, his manager began, voice taut. We've seen the video. It doesn't reflect well on the company. Clients are asking questions. Richard stammered, look, it's being blown out of proportion. I just didn't feel comfortable. That's not a crime. His manager's expression hardened. Maybe not a crime. But in this climate? It's poison. We can't be associated with it. I suggest you take some time off. Indefinitely. The word hung in the air like a verdict. Indefinitely. When he returned to his desk, his email inbox was flooded. Half were angry strangers who had somehow found his work address. The other half were HR notices, compliance memos, and a meeting invitation labeled employment review. By evening, his job was gone. A polite but curt statement from the company appeared online: "We do not condone discrimination in any form. The individual in question is no longer employed with us." Richard sat alone in his apartment, blinds drawn, laptop screen glowing in the dark. The comments hadn't slowed. His social media pages were a battlefield. Old high school friends unfriended him. His sister sent a furious text: "You embarrassed us. Don't call me." He tried to defend himself once, typing a shaky post about personal choice and cancel culture. Within minutes, it was torn apart, screenshot, ridiculed. For the first time in his life, Richard felt cornered. He had always believed the world would bend in his favor, that mistakes could be smoothed over with excuses or forgotten in time. But this wasn't fading. This was growing. And somewhere, deep in the back of his mind, a question he'd never asked himself before began to take root: what if I was wrong? Richard hadn't left his apartment in days. The blinds stayed shut, dishes piled in the sink, unopened mail gathered on the counter. His world had shrunk to the glow of his laptop screen and the endless churn of the internet dragging his name through the mud. He tried to avoid the story, but it was everywhere. Talk shows dissected it. Radio hosts joked about it. Hashtags with his name trended alongside words like racist, coward, pathetic. One night, restless and unable to sleep, Richard opened a long-form article that had been circulating widely. The headline froze him in place. The Uber driver who wasn't just a driver. He clicked. The article began with a photo, the same black man he had refused a ride from, only now dressed in a tailored suit, speaking at a tech conference. The words beneath hit Richard like a punch to the gut. Michael Turner, co-founder and CEO of the world's most widely used ride-sharing app, was behind the wheel when Richard Bennett refused to ride with him last week. Turner, known for occasionally driving incognito to better understand his company's day-to-day operations, has not commented publicly on the incident. Richard read the lines again and again, his chest tightening. Michael Turner. The Michael Turner. The man Forbes had called a visionary, the entrepreneur who had reshaped transportation. A billionaire, a symbol of innovation, and the man Richard had looked in the eye, dismissed, and humiliated. The article went on, painting Michael as a figure of resilience. It told the story of his rise from poverty to tech titan, his philosophy of connecting people through technology, his belief that everyone deserved dignity in transit. Every sentence dug deeper into Richard's conscience. He realized that while the internet saw his act as another ugly example of racism, he had struck at someone who had already fought his way through a lifetime of prejudice, someone who had built bridges where Richard had only built walls. Richard slammed the laptop shut, but it was too late. The truth burned inside him. He had spent his whole life convinced he was entitled to respect because of his skin, his upbringing, his job. But here was a man who had earned respect through brilliance, perseverance, and vision, and Richard had reduced him to nothing in a matter of seconds. The shame was unbearable. For the first time, Richard wasn't worried about losing his job, his reputation, or his friends. He was worried about something deeper, the realization that he had become the exact kind of man he once swore he wasn't. He sat in the dark for hours, the image of Michael Turner in his mind. Not just a driver. Not just a billionaire. A human being he had refused to see. The lobby of the downtown office tower felt like another world, glass walls gleaming in the morning sun, polished marble floors reflecting the hurried footsteps of professionals in suits. Richard had never felt smaller in his life. He had spent days debating whether to come. He had written emails to Michael Turner's office, most of them deleted before they were sent. Finally, one of them had reached a secretary, who, to his shock, had scheduled a brief meeting. Now, sitting outside a sleek conference room, Richard twisted his hands nervously. He had no speech prepared. Every apology he'd rehearsed sounded hollow, rehearsed, performative. What words could undo the weight of his actions? The door opened. Michael stepped in, not in the driver's jacket Richard remembered, but in a tailored suit. Still, his presence was the same, calm, steady, commanding without needing to demand anything. "Mr. Bennett," Michael said, his voice even. He didn't extend his hand. "You asked to see me." Richard stood, his throat dry. "Yes. I had to. I owe you an apology." Michael's eyes were unreadable. "Go on." Richard swallowed. "What I did was wrong. I don't have excuses. I was raised with ideas I never questioned, and I carried them into adulthood without thinking. That night, I acted out of ignorance, out of prejudice. And I hurt you. I hurt others watching, too. He faltered, voice breaking. "I'm sorry." The room was silent. Michael leaned back in his chair, studying him for a long moment. "You know," Michael said slowly, "when you refused that ride, it wasn't new for me. I've lived that moment 100 times, in different forms. At first, it used to anger me. Later, it just tired me. But I kept driving because I needed to remember, this isn't just about business. It's about dignity." Richard nodded quickly, desperate to show he understood. But Michael held up a hand. "I don't need your guilt," he said firmly. "What I need is change. You grew up with doors open to you that others never even see. You wasted that privilege by closing doors for people like me. So the question is not whether you're sorry today. The question is, what will you do tomorrow?" Richard's chest tightened. No one had ever spoken to him that way, not at work, not in his family, not in his entire life. For once, he didn't feel defensive. He felt seen, and judged, and somehow given a chance at redemption all at once. I don't know yet," Richard admitted, his voice trembling. "But I want to find out. I want to do better." Michael studied him again, then gave a small nod. "Then start there. Words are cheap. Actions aren't." The meeting ended as abruptly as it began. Richard walked out of the building into the sharp sunlight, blinking against its brightness. His apology hadn't erased anything, but Michael's words followed him like a challenge. And for the first time in his life, Richard didn't want to run from the weight of them. Weeks passed. For Richard, they were the hardest weeks of his life. He had lost his job, his reputation, and many of the friends who once laughed with him over drinks. The internet hadn't forgotten, either. His name still appeared in angry threads, a symbol of casual racism caught in the act. But something had shifted inside him after meeting Michael. He could no longer dismiss what he had done as a misunderstanding. The memory of Michael's calm words echoed in his mind. Words are cheap. Actions aren't. At first, Richard didn't know where to start. He volunteered at a local community center, stocking shelves for a food drive. He joined workshops about racial equity, sitting quietly in the back, listening rather than speaking. For the first time, he stopped seeing himself as the victim of cancel culture and began to see the harm of his own ignorance. One evening, he found himself walking past the same coffee shop where it had all begun. The street looked the same, neon signs glowing, cars pulling up for passengers. But Richard was different now. He thought about Michael's resilience, about how a man who had built something so powerful still chose to drive, to connect with people face to face. Richard realized he wanted to live with that kind of integrity, not to erase his mistake, but to build something better from it. Months later, a small article appeared online. It wasn't about scandal or outrage this time. It was about a new volunteer initiative in the city, helping underprivileged teenagers learn coding and technology skills. The founder, Richard Bennett, said he was inspired by the story of Michael Turner, a man who believed technology should be an equalizer, not a divider. Michael read the article late one night, sitting in his office. He smiled faintly. He didn't call Richard, didn't reach out. He didn't need to. Change wasn't about recognition. It was about direction. Outside his window, the city moved, people calling rides, drivers accepting them, countless connections happening every minute. That had been his dream all along, strangers sharing space, even just for a few miles, unequal ground. And maybe, just maybe, one ride at a time, the world could keep moving closer to the place he believed it could be.